Welcome to Divorce Law with Attorney David Badanes.
Hello and welcome to Divorce Law with experienced attorney David Badanes. David has extensive experience in divorce, child custody, child support, divorce mediation, and more. David personally handles each client with the attention that they deserve. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Navigating Custody in New York, What Every Parent Needs to Know. David, great to see you again.
Great seeing you again as well.
Can you explain the different types of custody arrangements that are recognized in New York State?
People always get these different custodies arrangements somewhat confused because there's really two parts to custody. And I emphasize that. And I also say to my clients, your friends, your family, your relatives, they mean well, but they're not attorneys. And they tend to mix up these terms. So it's very important to get this straight. So there's two parts of custody. One is, where is the child going to live the primary part of their time? And that's called residential custody. And then how decisions for the child, how are they being made for the child? You know, which parent, are they being made together, etc. So that's the first thing that you know, that those are two related in a sense, but certainly separate. Where the kid's going to live and who's making the primary decisions for the child. And we're talking big decisions, mainly education, religion, and medical. A little bit extracurricular, but we're not talking about whether the child eats Life cereal for breakfast or Cheerios. We're not talking whether they wear shorts that day or pants. We're not talking little issues. We're talking big issues. Again, education, medical, and religious. A little bit about extracurricular and sometimes legal. So that's an overall thing that they should know about. And then we could talk about, which I think we're going to get to next, about what joint custody, full custody, etc., and we can get into that as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Can you just kind of explain the difference between, full custody, joint custody,
Right.
how residential fits into that, and kind of how that all works?
Sure. So again, residential custody really just deals with where the child lives. It doesn't have anything to do with decision making. So again, people say, well, I have joint custody, I have this custody. I'm not saying you should be an attorney and question them, but you can have joint residential custody, meaning that the child is living 50% or very, very close to 50% with each parent. So even if it's 55-45, courts say, well, that means the person has 55% has residential custody. So it really has to be extremely close to 50-50 to use that term, joint residential custody.
Okay.
But people don't use that term.
I've never heard it. Yeah.
Well, because it's not really a term people throw around. But what they do talk about is full custody, joint custody, shared custody. So, and that really has to do, as far as the courts are concerned, with decision making. Okay. So if a parent has full custody, again, we're usually talking about decision making. So that parent could say, I want the child to go to, let's say, private school or homeschooling or the public school where I live. Okay, in terms of education. And also, of course, they can make, as the child gets older or whatever, I want the child to take advanced math versus regular math or whatever. Okay. Although, of course, when the child gets much older, they kind of make that decision anyway. But
that's true.
But that parent has full rights to make those three big decisions: education, what kind of religion they're going to be brought up in, and which doctor they're going to see, what therapist the person's going to see, and even what type of care. I mean, again, that a doctor could say, I don't want to get into the controversy about vaccines, but, I used a story that, when I was about 30 years old, I broke my wrist very badly. At that time, I had the decision, well, do I want a cast or what some people call an external fixation device? You look like Frankenstein. I was an adult, so I get to make that decision. But you get to make those kind of decisions in terms of what type of care medically for a child if you have full custody. So you don't, with full custody, you don't have to ask the other parent, hey, what do you think? What should we do? You have full rights to do it without talking to the other parent. If it's joint custody, again, for those type of decisions, you can't just say, well, I'm going to enroll the child into private school. No. If it's joint custody, you have to at least ask the other parent, say, what's your position on this? And then we get into, well, what happens if one parent says private school, one parent says public school, and there's a difference? So then the next question can be what the courts can impose as well. If there's a conflict in who makes in the decision, is there going to be someone who has final decision making? Okay, I say private, you say public. we disagree. I at least got your opinion. If I have a final decision making, I'm going to put the child in private school, let's say. Or you can leave it blank. And then what typically happens is the parents may disagree, but they may not want to go to court to kind of fight over these decisions. But if they have to go to court, they have to go to court. And they have to say, well, I think private school's better for this reason. So that's really it. Shared custody really talks about, and that's really where I should have said that in residential. Typically, shared custody has to do with where the child lives. Shared meaning they're living 50-50 or close. So it's really joint custody, full custody. And with joint custody, is does one parent have, the power to, if there's a conflict, to make that final decision?
Well, I got to ask, did you go with the cast or the Frankenstein arm?
I went with the Frankenstein arm because it was such a bad break that's what the doctor recommended. I mean, to this day, I still can see the little where they put them in.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. It was pretty bad, pretty good athlete back in the day. I was playing basketball with my friend. We were playing full court. The whole long story, but yes, very bad break.
Oh, that's awful. Oh, that's tough. Especially as you get, like, when you said you were 30, when you're older, those things
yeah, 30 was annoying, but it wasn't, so bad, but yeah.
Yeah, it could have been worse. Can you provide some examples or an example of a situation where full custody might be awarded versus partial custody?
Well, many times, I shouldn't say many times, certainly sometimes one parent says, you know what, I trust your judgment. And maybe they even know they're going to be sort of an absentee father or mother for whatever reason that they may have. Okay. Or again, maybe they're still going to be involved in seeing the child, but again, they really trust the judgment of the other party. Relatively rare, but it does happen.
Yeah.
Of course, the other time that the thing is, when you go to court, and if you go to a trial, I'll put it that way, not to court, because many cases go to court, but they don't go to trial. Only about 5 to 10% of cases go to trial. Judges in New York State can award full custody, but they have to believe that the parents can work together. So many times judges will say, if you go to trial, I'm warning you right now, I'm only going to award full custody to either mom or dad, or if it's a same-sex couple, to A versus B. And the couples have to take that chance or gamble that it's
a risk. Yeah.
Risk. So and why would a judge award full custody? They believe that parent is the parent better suited to make these type of decisions. There's a whole litany of factors, which we can go into if you like, of why a judge would make that decision.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask that next. How does a judge evaluate the best interest of a child?
Right. So what they look at first is sort of the facts on the ground, meaning, depending how old the child is, who's been taking care of this child, in the past, number one. Number two, who can take care of the child going forward? Look, if you have a job where you're working 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, pretty tough for you to take care of this. It doesn't mean you're knocked out, you can't get it, but the judge is going to be, wait a minute, you're going to be at work all day or traveling to work. Tell me how you're taking care of this child in the morning, getting them ready for school, how you're helping them with homework at night, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, can you overcome that? Yes, but that's a big factor when the other parent may say, well, I work 9 to 5, I work 5 minutes from my house. Yes, I can certainly get the kid on the bus in the morning, and there's childcare from, let's say, 3 to 5 o'clock. So a lot of times it's the actual facts on the ground that help a judge decide this. And again, who has been taking care of the child in the past? Who has been that primary caretaker of who's been taking care of the kid in the morning, after school, etc., or on weekends? Then there's other factors such as, has there been domestic violence, unfortunately? Who can provide a better life, so to speak? Who can provide a better educational opportunities for the child? So those are some of the factors that the court would look into. If there's drugs and alcohol, of course, those kind of things too.
Yeah, any sort of addiction or anything that could take away, for sure. Can custody agreements be modified over time? And if so, how does that work?
So again, most cases do end with a custody agreement versus a judge's order. Two different things. So if we're talking about both can be modified. An agreement is typically easier to modify than an order. But again, kids get older, things change. Maybe your job, maybe when you first went to agreement, you had that 8 o'clock to 8 p.m. job, and now you have a job and you're working from home. Maybe the child is older and I didn't mention this before, the child says, you know what, I'd rather live with mommy or daddy. So yes, agreements can be modified and so can orders, but you have to show what has changed since the agreement or the order. So again, you can modify a court order or an agreement. You have to show, look, we had this agreement and order on January 1st, 2000, whatever, 5 years, a year has gone by, and these are new events. This is what happened since. New job, the kid's gotten older, I'm doing this, whatever it is, but you have to show a change from that. Those are the two things, from when it was issued or signed to today. So, and if you can convince the court, then you can modify the agreement or order.
You mentioned maybe a kid gets older and says, I want to live with mom or I want to live with dad. Like, how does that work?
First of all, it's up to 18. But as a child gets older, there's sort of a joke, okay? A judge is going to say, well, I'm not telling a 16-year-old where to live. I mean, it's kind of said half true, but it's almost not always true. But if a 16-year-old decides that, you know what, I don't want to live with mom anymore for whatever reason, and goes to dad's house, and now dad says, oh, my daughter's been living here for a week, a month, whatever. Why am I, I should get custody now. So they could go to court and say, and that's that child who's, let's say 16, could say to the judge, in a sense, and there's a whole process for this, I prefer, it's not that I don't love mom or love dad, but I want to live here, and they have to tell why. That just to make it clear, in New York State, a child gets their own, in these custody battles, child gets their own attorney. It's called the attorney for the child. And just like there's an attorney for mom, attorney for dad, there's now an attorney for the child, and that attorney represents the child's interest. So they're not the mom's attorney. That the child does not go to court. That attorney for the child interviews the kid, finds out why they want it, what they would want, and they don't ask, hey, do you like mom better or dad? That's not what they do.
Sure, yeah.
But they do get to it by saying, hey, who helps you get you ready for school in the morning? Who picks you up from school in the afternoon? Who helps, depending on age, of course, who helps you with the homework? Who gets you to your soccer games? Who does this? Who does that? They get to these kind of events by facts, by asking those kind of questions. And they know, they're trained to know, read between the lines, so to speak. Only time a child goes to court is very rare still, where if there's an actual trial and the judge says, wait a minute, if this is a very close case, I need to hear directly from the child, him or herself. And the child will go into the judge's chambers, and it's only the child and the judge and that child's attorney in those chambers. So not the mom, not the dad, not the mom's attorney, not the dad's attorney. And again, the judge is not going to ask, hey, who do you love? But by talking to the child, they get an idea of, what the child feels.
Yeah, depending on how old the kid is, it could be like dad lets me eat cake for dinner and mom doesn't, like that.
That could be it could be like that. That's right. And that's another joke, but yes, it could be but again, they try to go beyond who lets the child stay up and not do homework.
So are there any myths about custody that you would like to debunk?
Well, the big one, of course, is moms or automatically get custody.
Yeah.
That is certainly in the last 10, maybe even 20 years now, is all based on the facts. Who's been primary caretaker, who's been taking care, and who can do it going forward. I have won many cases of custody for dads based on these type of facts. That's the biggest myth, that moms always get custody. Not true.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, I've been hearing that since I was a little kid, that it's always the mom. Was that the case at one point? Is that why? Is it a myth that's rooted in fact?
I think it's a myth rooted in fact because of the arrangements being made. I mean, it's still somewhat true, much less than it used to be, that the mom is the caretaker of the child, and that's a big factor. So.
Right. And the dad's the breadwinner a lot of time, or at least that's how what used to be more so. Yeah. Right.
So, but that's much, especially with people working from home these days, much less true. So It does have, but again, it's a myth when you say myth rooted in fact. Yes. But again, every case is different. So you can't, going in and thinking, well, mom, I'm going to win. Well, that's not the fact. That doesn't get it. It's okay. Tell me what the facts are. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, is parental alienation or making false allegations. You come in and say, well, dad's been beating up the kid, and that's totally false. I am telling you, that can overcome almost anything. Making false allegations to a judge, they can say, wait a minute, you're lying basically to the court, and I'm not going to give you, I don't care about, that could be a very like a number one factor.
Yeah.
And the same with parental alienation, where, let's say they're not living together anymore and dad's supposed to get the kid at least temporarily on weekends or whatever. Or recently I have a case where mom took off, didn't let dad see the kid for a month and hid, so to speak, from the dad. No judge is going to want to hear that. They're going to mean, wait a minute, I understand you got to court now, because sometimes it takes a while to get into court, but you hid this child from the dad for a month for no good reason. That never looks good.
Yeah, that's a bad look for sure.
So
like a character thing.
You can't just say I'm the mom and I get custody. You got to look at the facts.
Yeah, for sure. How can parents ensure that their custody arrangement remains in the best interest of the child as they grow up?
Well, you want to make sure that they're very specific and very flexible, which sounds somewhat against each other. Unfortunately, I've seen very bad agreements that don't talk about a lot of different things. Okay. It's much better to say, just for example, on Christmas Day, and I'm just using that as one holiday, on even years, I'll have the child from Christmas Eve at, let's say, 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock noon on Christmas Day, versus I'll have the child on Christmas Day. Does that mean at 5 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock? I don't know what it means. You tell me what it means. I like to make them very specific. Now, a lot of times that's, they'll say, wait a minute, going forward, even though it said, 7 o'clock to 12 noon, the parents may say, wait a minute, can you give it to me at 11 o'clock? Sure. But if they don't agree, at least they can point to the agreement and say, wait a minute, I don't have to give the child until 12 noon. So, that's what I mean by being flexible. The parents themselves can decide, but at least if they have an agreement, a custody order or agreement that says, that's very specific, that's what I call, it's like the Bible or whatever you want to call it. It lays out what you're supposed to do, in my opinion, very specific. So there shouldn't be any ambiguity on what's supposed to happen on a specific holiday, because those are what a lot of people fight over, the holidays. Or again, it should be laying out if it's going to be public school, private school, all these other things as best as possible. No one knew COVID was going to happen. So no agreement ever talked about COVID before COVID.
Good example.
So, you're always putting new stuff in based on what happens or what has happened, so, you do the best you can to cover every example you can.
Yeah. As much as you can foresee. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining us on Divorce Law with Attorney David Badanes. To connect with David, visit dbnylaw.com and be sure to like and subscribe our channel and leave a review if you enjoyed this episode. David, thanks so much for being here. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again.
You got it. Take care, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.